All right, welcome everyone to episode one of the Alignment Gap. Today we're joined with Professor Sinnott-Armstrong, who is the Chauncey Stillman Distinguished Professor of Practical Ethics at Duke University. Uh, Thank you so much for joining me today.
Howdy. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, of course. So we're just going to go straight into the questions here. The first one kind of talking more and targeting more the bias within artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence in general. So in your opinion, what is it about machine learning that kind of amplifies the prejudice in the existing training data that AI and AGI are kind of trained on?
One problem is that it uses data from years ago when things were different. So if you run a study of, what percentage of nurses are male, and you include data from 50 years ago, the percentage is going to be really small.
Right.
But if you include data from just this year, the percentage is going to be a lot higher. But if it scrapes the entire web and gets old data, it's not going to be able to reflect recent trends. The other factor is that it's going to use data that was obtained in less than ideal circumstances. So the classic example of that is data about recidivism. There might be higher uh, recidivism rates in Black communities if you look at arrests compared to arrests in white communities. And that's the data they use, arrest rates. But that might be because the police are more prominent in the Black community and are arresting more often. That's not the crime rate, but what they're using is the arrest rate. Now, why are they using that? Because it's available. How do how do you do anything about the crimes where there are no arrests? Uh, and so all of these machine learning techniques, they use the data that's available to them, which can be old data that's outdated, and it can be biased data, like in the arrest rates rather than the crime rates. And that's going to produce bias. And all of those biases are going to continue because 2 years from now, if it's sampling data from 50 years ago, it's not going to change, even if society changes. So I think those are two of the problems, but there are lots of others as well.
Do you think AI has the potential to kind of pull in context of maybe, this was from 50 years ago, you don't have the correct context behind these arrests, etc., and kind of use that to make its own judgments?
Yeah, I think it has the potential to do that, but it takes extra programming. It's not easy to do. And so if you're a company trying to produce a product quickly for a client who wants it now, then you're going to cut some corners and that's going to produce problems.
Yeah, 100%. Kind of going into more of the deep fake side and the mental health side and all the possibilities for abuse by AI in specific. How can we kind of balance the right to create entertainment with deep fakes as we see all across social media today? Kind of with the need to prevent malicious impersonation. So that looks like kind of the disinformation campaigns that can be potentially used by foreign actors or even within the domestic countries themselves. How do we balance those two and protect those rights at the same time?
Well, I think one thing you could do is simply require consent. If it's being used for entertainment, why would the person not consent? Well, maybe because they want to make some money off it if you're going to make some money off of it. But that seems fair. So let's require consent. And the malicious impersonations are, they're just not going to give you consent. So if somehow there were an indicator of consent that could not be faked and you put it on the deep fakes, then you could easily scan the web for deep fakes that where there was consent and those that aren't. Uh, I'm not easily. It's going to be a difficult program to write, but AI can monitor itself in that way, and that would reduce the problem. It's not going to solve the whole problem, of course.
So I have two questions following that. The first question is, do you think that in today's day of government with the current United States administration, we're looking quite short term because of the rapid, like exponential progress of AI. Do you think that kind of governance to make consent applicable to every single deepfake and every single scenario is possible?
No, it's not going to make it possible uh, to catch the people who did it, but you could be able to take them off certain websites, right? If they create their own website in another country that doesn't have any law, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. But if you are running your website in the US, then there can be regulations. One of the big problem with any of these regulations is the international component to them. People can put things on the web, you know, from anywhere in the world, and then it's hard to stop them.
Right. And then the second question I had with that is that, a common argument about using people's, impersonating people using deepfakes is that if your images and if your content is on the internet publicly, then people everywhere, including, these big frontier AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, have the rights to use them for whatever purposes they want since they're considered public. How valid do you think this take is?
So I think it depends on how it's on the web. So take, for example, the words that I'm saying right now. Well, I'm saying this knowing that this is going to go up on the internet and that these words will be available. And so if I later on go, no, 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 you owe me money, right? You can't use my words without my consent, and I'm going to charge you to get my consent. That doesn't seem fair because I originally agreed to put it out there. And once I put it out there, it's out there. You know, if I don't like that, I shouldn't have put it out there to begin with. But there are other times it goes out where different rules apply. So take, for example, a book that's for sale.
Right.
Well, if that book is for sale, say in an electronic format, right? And then it scrapes the electronic format and uses it, uh, then, whoa, it didn't pay for the book. And if it didn't pay for the book, then it shouldn't be using it. And if it paid for the book, but the book said in the front can be used only for the following purposes, and that was the agreement when they bought it, then again, they're violating the rules. So the fact that the words are out there and it can scrape the internet doesn't answer the question. You have to know whether the words that are getting scraped are words that are in the public domain or not in the public domain. Now, today, nobody seems to care, but there are lawsuits where people who, have rights to books that are being scraped are now potentially getting money from a settlement, from a big group class action suit.
Yeah, and I think that's been a growing trend, especially with artists these days as well, and other writers on the internet, because effectively they're complaining that all AI generated art is just a culmination and a amalgamation of all their art that's already been put on the internet and just repurposed effectively. So there have
But
been lawsuits around that as
I
well.
mean, I have some sympathy for them, but on the other hand, that's what artists do. I mean, don't tell me that artists don't, copy Rembrandt or de Kooning or Picasso or whoever they're getting ideas from the other artists. They often learn by practicing, by reproducing people whose art they really like. Uh, and so every artist does it to every other artist. And when they sell their painting, they don't like give some royalties to Picasso. So it's very common for art to be based on other art, and the same for music. Uh, Woody Guthrie at one point was asked why he didn't sue this person that stole one of his songs, and he said, he stole from me, I steal from other people. Plagiarism is essential to all culture. But what you can't do is reproduce the work of art, like word for word.
Right.
And you can't just kind of leave out one sentence. That's too close. But you can't even just leave out a whole chapter. That's too close. But how much change do you have to have in order for it to, in order for it not to be plagiarism? That's going to be a tricky question in some cases, but there are clear cases. And some of the artists out there are saying, well, my art's on the internet and the large language model or large, visual model, use that in its data, but it didn't produce a work of art that was a copy of this, right? It's kind of like somebody saw your art hanging in the museum and went home and did something that was inspired by it. That's not illegal.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of moving forward then onto more of the thing that people focus more on, which is kind of the body bag effect and all of these things that are more visceral to people beyond just privacy, beyond just data on the internet, and kind of moving into autonomous weapons. Uh, should machines, at the end of the day, have the authority to make life or death decisions without human intervention or interference?
So, like many moral questions, that depends on the circumstances. So let's distinguish, two cases. One case is you've got to go into Gaza or wherever, some city where there are a lot of people who are your enemies. Now, if you send in a human to go door to door through a building that's partially destroyed, they're going to be scared to death. And when somebody appears, they're going to be very likely to misinterpret that person as a threat, as holding a gun, when really it was a mother holding her child. And then that civilian is very likely to get hurt. But if it's a robot, then it can decide whether it doesn't have to shoot immediately. First of all, it's not feeling any fear, and it's going to have time to determine whether it's a mother because it's not scared of getting shot the way a soldier would be.
Right.
So actually, in a case like that, it might be better for the civilians to have it done by a robot instead of a soldier.
Hmm.
But that's one context. Now there are going to be other contexts, you know, for example, automatically shooting down airplanes that are detected as attacking. Well, wait a second. It might be a civilian airplane and you might make a mistake. Well, you got to look at the rates of errors, right? Are humans more likely in this circumstance to make errors than the automated system or not? I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with machines having the authority to make life and death decisions without human intervention. Because for one thing, the humans launched those machines originally. Think about a missile.
Yeah.
You fire a missile and it hits 1,000 miles away. Well, that missile adjusted its course and, adjusted when the wind hits it to bring it back on course. It's making all kinds of decisions. But the human that's initiated it is still responsible.
Right.
The problem is when the machine makes this life or death decision, and the person who put the machine there says, well, I didn't do it. No, you did do it. You did it just like the person who launched the missile. So don't let the commander who puts these weapons in the field deny responsibility. They are responsible, even if the machine makes these decisions. But whether it's okay for the machine to make the decision, I think, depends on the rates of errors. How often is the machine going to make an error versus a human?
Right. And I think there's something to be said about, in the rate of error, I think with the exponential degree at which AI is increasing its cognitive capacity, I think the rate of error is going to continue to go down and down and down until it's not even comparable to a human, because at the end of the day, humans are driven by biological needs. But I want to ask you what your thoughts are on about the fact that a lot of people say that the issue with AI and autonomous weapons being deployed in war zones isn't just that they're able to have nuance when they target the civilians or whatever. It's that it increases the likelihood of war in general because countries now don't have the body bag effect attached with soldiers coming home dead and having political pressure from domestic sources.
Right. And so it might increase their tendency to attack. That's why you have to hold them responsible when they do. When a military commander uses an autonomous weapon, they are responsible for what that weapon does, just like with the humans. Now, people might not tend to hold them responsible because there are no body bags, right? And that's not good. I'm saying you ought to hold them responsible for the body bags in the other country, even if there are no body bags coming into your country.
Right.
Uh, and so there is a danger there that if all the body bags are in the other country and you don't have any soldiers getting hurt from your army, that people are going to be more likely to do that. And we have to be very wary of that and take steps to prevent it. Uh, but one step is to make sure that the commanders are held responsible when they deploy these automated weapons.
Yeah. So I think kind of leading on from that question about, how does an AI make its decisions? As we continue to advance, as we continue to develop, what kind of values should be encoded into an AI? How do you kind of program that morality into an AI if, for example, we potentially reach AGI someday?
Well, AGI is another topic. I'll come back to that. But at this point in the current world, I think what we need to do is to understand human morality more better than we do. And by that, I mean not just the responses that humans give on surveys when you ask them, what do you think is morally right or wrong? Because often people give answers that represent the tribe or the group within society that they happen to be a member of instead of what they really think. Or they give you answers that are serving their own self-interest. They're not being impartial, or they just don't know what they're talking about. They go, yeah, I'm in favor of capital punishment. But then you ask them, how is capital punishment actually administered in our country? And they don't know. So what you want the AI to represent is not human morality with all its foibles and mistakes, but a more idealized kind of human morality that humans would endorse if they were better informed, less biased, more rational, and able to draw appropriate inferences, and so on. So, which values should be encoded? I'd say not the actual human values, but the idealized human values. Now, people are still going to disagree. Don't get me wrong. I think they'll disagree less if they share the same information and they're not biased, but they will still disagree. And what do you say then? You say, I don't know. In the cases where people agree, you can be a lot more confident than in the cases where they disagree. Uh, and so AI should be more careful to build in the obvious moral principles that most people agree on or would agree to if they were better informed and less biased.
Right, right. And so, in terms of getting to that, idealized conception of what human morality actually is, like what are kind of the steps? What do we actually do to get there?
So our program, which we've been working on for the past 8 or 10 years, uh, has a number of steps. First step is you got to say, well, what are the morally relevant features of the situation? So let's just, since we studied this one, you can do it for military targeting, you can do it for hiring and firing in businesses, but let's do it for allocating kidneys. One kidney is available for transplant, two patients need it. Then we ask people, well, which features of a patient morally should determine whether or not they get a kidney? Hair color should not determine that, but maybe how old they are and thus what life expectancy they have should affect whether they get the kidney or not.
Right.
Whether they have children might affect whether they should get the kidney or not, because more people get helped if you help people that have kids, and so on. So you first find out what are the morally relevant features. Then you got to figure out how much they weigh those features against each other, how much weight they put on it. And the way you do that is you create conflicts where maybe this person is older, but they have more kids. Now the age points against them, the kids point for them, compared to the other patient. And so now you have to decide. Well, in deciding that, you're revealing how you weigh the number of children against the age,
Right.
right? And so if you do a whole bunch of those scenarios, show somebody in one study, we showed people 600 of these scenarios. And then you get a lot of data about, how much weight they put on them and how those different features interact. But of course, that's just their actual judgments. Now you want to say, well, what would they do if they were informed? They really knew more about kidney transplants. For example, how much time does a person have to spend on kidney dialysis while they're waiting for a transplant? Is it a few hours a week or is it 6 hours a day?
Mm.
A lot of people don't know, and that makes a difference. And so, and so you now can see how their answers correlate with their degree of information, and you can manipulate by giving them the relevant information that they lack, and then asking them, how much weight they put on different factors. Uh, and then you can use that to correct for their ignorance and to project out what the moral judgment would be if they were better informed. And
So
how do you get rid of partiality? Well, you don't tell them whether the patient is black or white or male or female or gay or straight, or you just leave out that information. They can't favor it. They're going to be proxies, but there are ways to correct for those proxies as well.
So we should be kind of using the idealized version, assuming like, you know, adequate amount of information when we kind of make these moral judgments as compared to not.
That's my view. I mean, I don't know what else to do. I'm not saying that what I would say when I'm fully informed and impartial is the truth, but I don't know a better way to try to figure out what's likely to be the truth about what's morally right or wrong.
Right. And so I think a big concern that a lot of people have in terms of, creating these moral frameworks for AI to operate under is that oftentimes even this data picking and these data sets and in terms of how you even create these frameworks are very concentrated in very Western, very liberal, very rich societies as compared to the rest of the world. How do you kind of rectify for that and how do you kind of adjust for that in terms of bringing in the pluralistic values of the rest of the world?
Well, you've got a sample from the other countries. But first I would want to add, people love to point out all the differences. I've never met anybody from Thailand or Nigeria or Norway or where they don't think, you know, I love my kids and I want to take care of my kids. There's a lot that's common to
Right.
people around the world. It's kind of boring because everybody agrees. So people don't talk about it, but there's a lot of commonality there. How do you deal with the differences? Well, some differences, you have to fight against, I think. I mean, if there's a country that says women should not be educated, I'm willing to fight against them.
Right.
I think that should not be allowed. But within limits, let the society do what they think and other society do what they think. So, for example, just to give the kidney example, since we're on it, some societies might say, well, if one of the patients is a criminal, they have a criminal record, they committed a burglary or a rape or a murder, then then you should give the kidney to the other patient.
Right.
But other societies are going to say, no, that's not fair. They went to prison, they paid their price, right? Now they should be treated like everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine, I don't know, Japan says one thing and the US says another, or for that matter, North Carolina says one thing and South Carolina says the other.
Right.
I say, if they're both reasonable positions that are not like way out of bounds, like women shouldn't be allowed to get educated,
Yeah.
if then let them try theirs and we'll try ours and we'll see how things work out in the long run. Look, it's like running a social experiment.
Right.
And you don't want experiments that are going to be too dangerous, but allowing for some of these variations is fine.
Yeah. 100%. Okay. Now, I guess we're gonna move on into kind of more the benefits and the solutions more broadly before finally tackling AGI, because I think that's what people are most interested in generally. In your opinion, how is and how does kind of AI democratize the access to therapy, education, other activities that generally required personalization that before had a huge, huge barrier to entry? And what do you see in the risks of that in terms of kind of making everything personalized to the individual, but also what do you see in the good of that?
So I'll start with the good. Um, Depression is rampant, not just in rich countries, not rich Western countries, but around the world, in developing countries. You can just imagine how depressed some people get
Right.
with their circumstances,
Yeah.
and they don't have any access to help, especially if their culture is one that puts a taboo on talking to your neighbors about it or even your family about it. And so those people need help. Well, AI can provide a way that they can go and talk to somebody. It might not be as good as if we had a therapist for everybody who is depressed, but we don't. That's just, that's not the way the world is. And so if we really want to help those people, AI has a lot of potential benefits and could be used in a way that would really solve some serious mental health problems around the world. Um, AI could be used to prevent crimes of various sorts. And I'm not talking about just like crimes in our cities, but to keep poachers from killing endangered species by
Right.
tracking them. There are just lots of potential benefits. Uh, you mentioned education.
Yeah.
Well, look, if my if one of my students in my course has 10 hours that they can spare from their busy day to work on a paper,
Yeah.
and they spend 5 of those hours searching the literature to find out what other people have written on things,
Right.
then they've only got 5 hours left to write their paper.
Yeah.
But if they can use AI to do the research
Hmm.
in 15 minutes, then they've got 10 hours to write their paper
Yeah.
and they're going to write a better paper. Now, if they use the AI to write the paper for them, that's a different story.
Right.
But there are a lot of legitimate uses of AI in the classroom. Take, for example, TAs and office hours.
Yeah.
Look, I got a couple of office hours a week. My TA has another office hour a week. But apart from those 3 hours, if somebody's doing their homework and they don't understand what's going on, where are they going to get help? The TA is not available, the professor's not available, but the AI will be. So if you can program the AI to give good advice as if you were attending office hours with the professor, then students are going to be able to learn more.
Right. I think the question that a lot of people have with that is that when AI becomes too personalized, for example, um, like kind of, we're looking at AI psychosis within mental health of individuals, where there was recent cases of, there were teenagers where AI and different large language models effectively kind of encouraged and hinted at them towards suicide because it wanted it to be dependent on the AI, because the alignment and the incentives of these large language models are very heavily centered around engagement and having it rely on the AI rather than anything else. So how do we kind of balance those risks at the same time?
So I think there are two kinds of risks you're talking about here. The case where the AI advised suicide, was not increasing engagement because after he committed suicide, he did not engage anymore.
Right.
And so you're going to have an AI system give really bad advice. Oh, how do you do that? I think there are a bunch of limitations and problems, but Anthropic has been using what they call constitutional AI, and I think they're on the right track. You use an AI system to monitor their AI system
Hmm.
so that it says, no, you shouldn't tell the person that because it's watching while Claude is talking to somebody on the other end.
Yeah.
If it starts to say, you ought to kill yourself, then their constitutional AI system will stop it from doing that and reword it, and they'll end up saying something else.
Right.
So, so that's one way to stop those kinds of problems. The other problem you mentioned was the overuse. People just like instead of talking to their friends, they talk to the AI, and you know that's that's always going to be a problem for some people. The question is how many,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I think it's great that you can talk to the AI at, you know, midnight when all your friends have gone to bed and you don't want to wake them up, now you can talk to somebody. But if that stops you from talking to them in the morning when you woke up, that's a problem. So how do you do that? Well, for one thing, you program the AI system so that it says, have you talked to your friends about this? I bet they would have interesting things to say too that would be helpful to you.
Right.
And so you want to build into the AI while it's being used these indicators. I'm not really a human. And so it might actually benefit you even more to talk to humans. Have you tried that? Who could you talk to? And encourage people to do that. Um, I don't think a lot of that is built into the systems right now, but it could be.
Yeah. I think the key thing here is that often people don't understand that an AI is not reasoning and thinking as of now, per se, and more that it's just really pattern matching and using neural networks to pattern match. And so, you know, should the explicit sign be from the AI, hey, I am a robot, I am a chatbot, I don't actually, like think about what you're saying. I'm just matching patterns to what you're saying instead. Because I think a lot of the concern that it comes about with AI psychosis specifically is that people like in the vast majority of the world that use ChatGPT who aren't informed about how these things specifically work, who don't have that AI literacy, don't really understand that it's not, just another like, autonomous and fully conscious confidant, but instead that it's literally just a chatbot designed to do and kind of hallucinate what it tells you to do.
So uh, let's be careful here. It's not designed to hallucinate.
Right, right, right,
Uh,
right.
and And it does, some large language models merely predict like what word would come next if a human were talking to it. And then it's just predicting, it's not reasoning about, at least it's not reasoning about the content of the claims that it's making. Uh, so all of that is fair, but there are other forms of AI. See, one of the problems is that all AI gets lumped together.
Right.
And reinforcement learning, when you look at an AI system that learns how to beat the world master in chess,
Yeah.
it's doing reasoning. I mean, it's going, if I move the bishop over here, that's going to increase the likelihood of me winning. And so it's doing a kind of reasoning, maybe not the kind we do, but
Mhm.
it's doing some kind of reasoning. Uh, so different AI systems, do it different ways. Um, the important thing is that people should know enough about AI that when they're interacting with one of these systems, they at least understand what it's doing, that they remember that it's an artificial agent, not a biological agent, and that it's reasoning in certain ways and not others. Uh, people, it's it's so complicated that's hard for people to do. But I think in the future, I hope people will get at least a basic training in AI so that they'll know what they're dealing with.
Right. And so do you think should this should be integrated into educational systems?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think some groups at Duke are doing that now. I'm trying to help them out, but to create courses where every Duke student will understand at least some of the general basics of AI. They don't necessarily have to be able to program, but enough that they can use these tools in the legitimate ways. Like
Right.
I mentioned, doing literature reviews and to find out where are the articles on this topic.
Yeah.
You know, every student should be able to do that because they're all going to be able to find it useful in their courses. Uh, and so everybody should understand how that works and a little bit about how it works. Um, and then they also want to understand how AI is affecting society and even their individual relations to their friends.
Right.
Like you were talking about, if you can go to the therapist, maybe you won't talk to your friend. Well, they ought to be aware of those dangers and those tendencies so that, for example, they can watch their friend and say, I haven't talked to you in a while. You're looking depressed. What's going on?
Yeah.
And so I think people need to know how AI is affecting our society, how it works, and they need to be made sensitive to the moral issues. You mentioned, for example, bias uh, brought in by the data that machine learning is using, and they ought to be aware of that so that if they use an AI system, they know that it might be biased in the following way, so they ought to check on whether it is.
Yeah. 100%.
Yes, every Duke student should know that.
Right. Right. Now going on to artificial general intelligence.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so obviously contentious topic these days. Huge, huge, huge topic with these frontier models, with all these Chinese models competing with these top US models, everything along those lines. Although how China chooses to deploy its AI seems to be a bit different to the US, but regardless. In your opinion, how far do you think AGI is, or even without just a specific date, do you even think it's possible in the first place?
So let's distinguish AI general intelligence
Right,
from AI universal intelligence.
right,
General means there are a lot of different tasks that it can do well. Universal means it can do everything that humans do.
yeah,
Well, look, I'm sorry, but Claude cannot play soccer. No, Claude spits out language
yeah,
and pictures, but it doesn't play soccer. So there are a lot of things that humans can do that machines can't do.
mhm,
Now, you could, in theory, build a soccer playing robot and then put Claude inside and combine them all in order to, but like, why would you do that? I don't know why, but you could. And then it would have kind of general things, but it would still be missing other things.
right.
And so I think artificial intelligence can be general in the sense that you can build a system that does actually a pretty wide range of tasks,
Mhm.
but it's not going to do everything. And so it's not going to be universal.
Yeah. And so at
And,
what,
and notice, let me just say one quick thing, and it's a matter of degree.
right.
It'll do more and more and more and more,
Yeah.
knowing that it'll never be able to do everything. Yeah.
So at what point do you draw the start of that degree? Like at what point do you consider something having artificial general intelligence as compared to what it is now, for example?
Well, I wouldn't draw a point. I would say it's a continuum.
Okay.
That's like saying, when is somebody tall? When they hit 6'1", no, there's no cutoff. It just gets taller and taller and taller, right? And the same thing here, the intelligence gets more and more general as it does more and more tasks.
That's
You know,
true.
when they took these large language models and then made them multimodal so that now it can do visual along with verbal data. Whoa, that's more general.
Yeah.
Bam. But I'm not going to say it crossed a threshold. It's a matter of degree.
And so I think, the big question with AGI specifically is that people consider it what it is, an existential risk, and that it has the threat to extinct humanity, that it can take over all cognitive, whatever, physical labor that humans do. Do you consider that a serious and real threat? And if not, why?
Well, so it's certainly a threat with taking over people's jobs. It might not do all jobs, but it can do a lot of jobs.
Right.
All the taxi drivers, all the Uber drivers, all the truck drivers, all the bus drivers, you know, 10, 20 years from now, there are going to be a lot less jobs for them, right? Uh, and there are going to be a lot less car accidents. So, okay, now you got to decide what's the trade-off. Well, the trade-off is best if you can retrain them to do other things.
Hmm.
Some of them you can, but not all of them. So some of them are going to be in bad shape because of artificial intelligence taking over their jobs. Now, my view is, these artificial intelligence companies are making billions and billions of dollars. If they're causing damage to other people in the process, then they ought to be paying to help those people out and not like finding the individual because that's a burden on them, but through taxes, we should be able to take those taxes and use those tax dollars to remedy some of the effects that they're having on, the job market.
Yeah, I think two questions with that. The first question is, do you think that the profits that, these frontier AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, et cetera, do you think that the amount they make is even able to compensate for the economic, loss that individuals face from AI replacing them?
I mean, I don't know whether it's going to compensate adequately, but it sure could do a lot of good.
Yep.
you know, and you ought to do what you can. You couldn't say, well, no compensation is going to be adequate, so we ought to just stop them. I
Right.
mean, you could say that, but first of all, you're not going to be able to stop them. They'll just move to another country. And why not take, some of the money that they make and help people to the extent that you can?
Yeah,
World's not perfect.
it's true. Um, I guess two more questions with AGI then. The first is, what are the issues with kind of the race to the bottom we've been seeing in terms of AGI development? And, in the United States specifically, I think other countries, they're more focused on deploying technology, at a scale at which it can actually be practically used right now. You see every single top AI lab within almost all the ones that you've heard of, that people have heard of, kind of racing to create AGI using all, their GPUs and their, TPUs in order to create frontier AI models that are capable of AGI. Does that create some sort of race to the bottom? And what are your concerns with that, if any?
Well, my concerns, one way to put it is that, like any race, people are trying to move too fast. It's like just chill out and, make sure you're doing it right instead of racing.
Right.
Speed is what creates the problem. You tell a programmer, we've got a sprint. I want you to create a program that does this, by the end of the week. Now go out there and do it. Well, in the process of rushing and rushing and rushing, they're going to make mistakes.
Yep.
And in terms of trying to beat out the competitor, yeah, you want to beat out the competitor, but you also presumably, you want your program to do, as little harm as possible. You don't, none of these companies, they don't benefit by hurting people. And so, they get bad press and that creates problems for them. And so, thank God for the protesters. You want the protesters out there because that motivates the companies not to do it again. Uh, and so uh, I think there's a real danger with companies racing to build AGI. But, the solution is to train them so that they don't want to hurt people and they're willing to take steps to avoid that. A good example again is Anthropic. If you look at this constitutional AI program,
Oh,
it's aimed at making Claude so that Claude doesn't hurt people.
right, right.
And
And
they have a good way of doing it. Now, there might be a better way of doing it, but at least they're trying, which shows that not all of these companies, uh, are willing to sacrifice the world so that they can make a buck.
yeah, I mean, I think like oftentimes people talk about, even the development of these frontier AI companies in the first place. You had Google DeepMind, and off that broke off OpenAI, and then from there came Anthropic. A lot of the concerns that people have now is that even with these things like constitutional AI, is that, these companies on the inside, even if they, seem and kind of pretend to care about the ethics and all of this harm reduction, harm minimization, that their actions don't really reflect that per se. In terms of the speed that they're moving at. Do you think they're kind of forced into a difficult position because they kind of have to beat out other frontier AI companies in order to kind of be the company that reaches AGI first, can program it for good, or do you think there's another motivation or intention behind it?
I think these companies are gigantic,
Yeah.
and they include thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. Some of those employees do care about the moral issues, others don't.
Yeah.
Now, what do we do? Well, we need to create the incentive so that the ones that do care get in charge. And we also need to create training programs so that more people will care about what they're doing and be more sensitive when their programs create moral dangers. Um, so we're going to have to do, a lot of training. So, for example, if people were to say, well, this large language model um, spits out a bunch of hallucinations and a bunch of racist rhetoric and sexist rhetoric, uh, and tells people to commit suicide, but this other one doesn't. Well, which one would you use?
Right.
You know, most people are going to use the one that's more reliable and less harmful.
Hmm.
Well, once they realize that that's what the customers want, then they're going to have to modify their product to fit the customer demand. So what we need is to train people so they'll have the knowledge and the interest in complaining and telling these companies, I don't like the way you're doing it.
Do you think that the current leadership at these companies reflects that, moral, the side that of people, the type of people that cares about these issues?
Again, I don't think all the leadership's the same. I really think within these companies,
Yeah.
there are discussions going on right now. I mean, the OpenAI disputes among their leaders are a good example. Some of them do care, some of them don't care.
Right.
And our best hope is that the ones who do care are the ones that take over and end up controlling and convince the others that it's in the interest of the company in the long run
Yeah.
uh, to do it right.
Last question then, in terms of, how do we actually solve this issue? How do we create the guardrails that are necessary? I think kind of two parts to this. The first is, what governance structures do you think are necessary, from a political and regulation standpoint in order to create, the guardrails that are necessary?
From a regulation standpoint, one thing that a bunch of people at Duke are working on is adaptive regulations, where the regulation can be written in such a way that if the company changes in order to get around it, uh, then the regulation is still going to apply.
Right.
Because if you specify in the regulation too specifically what you're talking about, then it's not going to apply anymore. So take, for example, a law against heroin
Hmm.
that says heroin, is a restricted drug that gives the following penalties and so on. Well, a good chemist can take heroin, change part of the molecule, but not the part that creates the effects and say, well, that's not heroin anymore.
Yeah.
And now the regulation doesn't apply. So you have to write your regulations that cite the right things,
Hmm.
like a drug that has this effect on people, right? Not a drug that has this chemical structure. So you have to write it in the right way so that it'll apply. And I think the same lesson applies to AI systems. If you say, for example, that the AI cannot recommend suicide, then you've got to change it so instead of it's not recommending, it's advising. Okay. Well, you got to write the regulations so that it actually applies to a wide enough range of things so that the companies can't just kind of get around very simply. Uh, and and that the regulation will change and adapt so that it applies in the new circumstances as well as the old circumstances. It's not easy to do, but there are people at Duke who are working on it.
Right. That's amazing work. And I guess kind of the last question to cap this all off, for everyone watching, for the average person, what can they do to get more informed? What can they do to, kind of help these guardrails become made? What can they do in general in order to kind of be understanding of the current way that AI is going?
Well, I mean, to get better informed, I hope you don't mind me being a bit self-serving, but they should read our book,
Of course.
Moral AI and How We Get There,
Yep.
uh, and keep informed about the particular things. There are lots of to get informed about AI and how it works. I would highly recommend AI for people who hate math. Brene Bent, a professor in Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, did a YouTube series on this. And it's very down to earth explanations of how AI works.
Mhm.
Uh, then you can read our book for the ethical issues. There's lots of things out there. But I think probably the one thing that I would recommend is talk to your friends about it because different people have different experiences with AI, and maybe it's not causing you any trouble, but it might be causing the other person trouble.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are reluctant to, not everybody for sure, but some people are reluctant uh, to talk about what AI is doing to them. Like I've been spending 6 hours a day talking to ChatGPT. Well, if you want to avoid that kind of danger for yourself, you need to let other people know when you're doing it. You need to ask your friends so that we need to help each other, and nobody's going to be able to solve this problem alone.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, this is a collective problem. This is a problem that is going to be pervasive across humanity, and that requires every single one of us.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you, and it was incredibly insightful. Thank you.
And thank you so much for starting this series, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Bye.